thought we'll just be helping people with investment properties. We bought a few for ourselves and recognized that the market can be challenging for somebody who's not based here and very fluent with the language. Over the course of time, we kept being asked to do more and more stuff that's not directly related to investment properties. So these days we help people with holiday homes, family homes, not as much, because family homes require constant views and tours together with the family in each particular location. So that we leave to people like Emil. Land for development, commercial properties. Our goal has been from the get-go to provide nationwide coverage, which is what we do. And we are an added layer of service. So we're not agents, we're not property managers, we're definitely not building managers. We, depending on what we're hired to do, we either put people in touch with the right people who can help them in each and every location around the country. So we try to build as extensive of a network as possible. Or alternatively, we do everything on their behalf. They just need to talk to us as a single point of contact, and then we'll enlist the third-party providers. A lot of our work consists on replacing these providers when they don't do such a good job, which is especially the case with property management, but also with the purchase. If you start working with an agent, not going to happen with Emil, but let's say Emil doesn't do such a good job or is not able to source what the people are looking for, then no offense, even though he's a friend and part of our network, we'll just move on to the next agent. If a property manager starts well, but then doesn't do such a good job, we'll replace him with another one. So we try to answer all questions and solve all problems for our clients. We obviously can't guarantee that everything will work smoothly and effectively, but we do our best. And most importantly, we do our best to amend the situation if and when that happens. Some news. There are quite a few real estate agents in the room. There were yesterday. I'm sure there are today as well. We are always on the lookout for bilingual realtors anywhere in the country, but especially people who can serve as a buyer's agent regardless of where the property is, and send people from each direct location to view properties to make it cheaper for the customer if and when that's necessary. Always on the lookout. If you're fairly fluent in English, can provide documentation in English to clients, and are able to work in your location or all over the country, even better, please contact us. We need you. We have a lot of customers to send you away. That's always a very valuable commodity in Japan, or bilingual real estate agent. We also have just decided to start a kind of seminar series or mini academy for English-speaking agents who have not worked with foreigners before or are interested in expanding the business with foreigners. We're going to give them a series of instruction seminars on the kind of issues and the kind of mannerisms and the kind of dealing with the scary, weird foreigners that they need to learn if they want to expand their business. And once we're done with the training, we will also be vetting them and sending customers their way. So if you know an agent who's bilingual and interested in getting into the foreigner market, again, please send them our way. Okay, so what are the reasons that people tend to buy something that might not be the best property for their needs, whatever their needs may be? We'll get into the various property profiles in a minute and how those factors play into each and every property profile, but the common reasons that tend to lead people astray. The first is emotional attachment. I need to be careful when I speak about this, because I keep saying to my clients when they express frustration or sadness or are not willing to look at the full picture when they're looking at a property, my automatic response is, I wouldn't get emotionally attached to any particular property. It's a process. There will be many of them that might come and go before you land on the one. I've recently been scolded very harshly when I said that to a female client who told me that I should not be telling women in the workplace to not be emotional. At the risk of saying that, I will say that I say that to all clients of all genders. If you get emotionally attached to a property, you're not seeing the full picture. You love the look of it, but it might be crashing down at the seams. There might be termites. The roof might be leaking. The building might not be managed properly. All of the stuff that we'll get into. Try, even if it's for your holiday home, somewhere where you're planning to live and spend a lot of time, do try to detach yourself from the love that you feel for this particular property and try to look not just at the numbers, but at the real potential of the place or lack of potential. Secondly, some people are on a budget, which is fair enough. But if your entire life savings are $20,000 or $30,000, and you come in wanting to buy whatever you can buy at that price, and you're aware of what you're getting into, and you know that it might not be the best buy, but you're willing to ride it till it drops. If it's an old house, you're willing to cut on the yield. If it's because that's what you can afford, that's fine. But if you're going to be pinching pennies, you know that you could get something that's going to be better if you slightly increase your budget, and you don't because you want to get, the best bang for your buck. This is not the best bang for your buck. Don't be realistic with your budget. I'm not saying overspend, overbid, go crazy, but pinching pennies is going to cost you a lot more in the long run. I should be looking here, not there, shouldn't I? How long you've been spending on the search is a really big factor for a lot of people. Some people, especially in the case of Akiya's, also in the place of looking for higher yield or lower budget properties, tend to spend months and months and sometimes up to a year or two until they land on the one. Not necessarily because they're super picky, but because they're looking for something which might be a bit more rare in the market, or they're looking in a particular asset class where assets are often being knocked off for whatever reason. Maybe due diligence didn't work out. Maybe maybe it's a very popular area and they keep missing out because the properties get sold by the time they conduct the inspection. Whatever the case may be, it can be frustrating to be looking for a long time. But if you then start to widen your criteria and not worry so much about dotting the I's and crossing the T's, you will eventually hurt yourself again financially in the long run. Lack of familiarity with the market. For example, we had a chat yesterday about single-family homes. We had a chat about Airbnb. People are assuming single-family homes are built in a certain construction style in Japan because that's what they're used to from the States or Australia or Europe or wherever they're coming in from. People think that you can just rent a property on Airbnb immediately after purchase. They're not aware of the licensing requirements in Japan. Familiarize yourself with the market or work with professionals who are familiar with the market and try to listen to what they're saying. Again, that'll save you a whole lot of pain down the track. Simply lack of experience in property purchases or investment overall, which is a common thing. Maybe you're not even aware of how things work in your home country, but your headline reading, or again, the free houses in Japan is a perfect example of that. You're not really aware of what's involved in property investment overall. And lastly, which is the worst example of those three, is pure hubris, right? So you're assuming that things will work your way because you want them to work your way. You're assuming that the agents that you're dealing with will be above board. They are Japanese. The vast majority of them will be above board. But being Japanese also means that they're not going to necessarily strongly tell you something if they see that you're really gearing towards a particular property and you're all gung-ho about it. They might say, "Are you sure?" And that'll be the extent of the conversation. So don't think that you know anything. Don't assume that because I'm very familiar and I'm a big fan of the mantra, like, if we build it, they will come. Willpower does make a difference, but being headstrong is not necessarily the right idea. You probably will be able to push everyone involved into doing things your way. It's not necessarily going to get you, again, the best bang for your buck. Okay, so let's break that down into various property types. First of all, Akiya Hunter. Sorry for stealing your thunder, Matt. That's not here yet. Okay, good. I can call you people Akiya Hunters. What are the things that we want to look at when we see a cheap property that's an Akiya? And Akiya, by the way, I don't know if it was mentioned, but I keep mentioning it again and again. Akiya is a very vague term that international media is sort of focused on a very niche aspect of. Akiya is any abandoned house. $1.5 million a mansion in central Kyoto, right over the Philosopher's Path, that hasn't been lived in for a year is technically considered an Akiya, right? So Akiyas don't have to be abandoned, dilapidated rural properties. It's any vacant home in Japan. But what we're referring to here is the cheaper end of the scale. And the things that you want to look at are, obviously, its structural condition, right? Properties in Japan, unless they were built pre-World War II, like those amazing kominkas that you see in the countryside with the massive beams and the ones that look like temples, they were built to last. Anything built post World War II and up until about 10, 15 years ago ish was built from non-doable materials, pretty flimsy, definitely not built to last. And you definitely want to conduct a structural inspection on anything that's 30 years and older. I would say even 10, 15 years and older, not a bad idea. Japan has a lot of earthquakes, typhoons, things that can cause damage to the property, even, pardon me, if it's not visible damage. You definitely want to conduct a structural inspection. You want to confirm the structural condition of the property. Even if it's cheap, by the way, the fact that it's cheap, again, you think, okay, I'm just paying $20,000 for this one, whatever condition it's in. But if the extent of the damage means that the property will keep deteriorating over time, for example, land liquefaction, tilting, termites, whatever the case may be, you will have to attend to it quickly, because the longer you wait, the worse the damage will get, the more it will cost you to repair it, and many, many times it will cost you several times of the price of the property, which again is acceptable for some people, but be aware of what you're getting into. And in many cases, it might even be worth just demolishing it and rebuilding. Again, all good if you know what you're getting into, but don't assume that you don't need to because it's cheap. You definitely do. Is it connected to sewage and water supply? There are a lot of properties, especially out in the rural areas, that are not, meaning they might have a septic tank, which is fine. It's a few extra $100 a year to maintain a septic tank. But it might be on a kumitori pump. They call it pump. It's a fancy name for basically a cesspool under the house that needs to be emptied every 2 or 3 months. Those stink like you wouldn't believe. If you've ever been to someone's Jisan Basan's house in the countryside that has one of these, you go anywhere near the toilet, you can smell it from miles away. So you definitely, again, know what you're getting into. If it is on pump toilet, you want to replace it with at least a septic tank, even better connected to sewage lines if possible, depending on whether they run in this area or not. And that's an expense of, again, somewhere between 1 to 4 million yen, depending on what you're putting in place and how far, if it is sewage lines, how far they are from the boundary lines of the property. So if you're buying a 2 million yen property, you might be spending 3 million yen just to connect it to city sewage, something to be aware of. Similarly, with water supply, a lot of the rural properties, not as many as sewage issues, but a lot of the rural properties will be on well water, right? Which sounds romantic and lovely, but wells can dry out. We do have at least one client that I'm aware of, somewhere in Shizuoka or Yamaguchi, I think, who was okay with it, had the water quality tested, which you'll have to do every year if you want to be drinking or bathing in it. And then just called us one day to say, hey, no more water. Turns out the well dried out. And then it could take up to 6 months, 8 months, if even possible, to connect to city water supply, depending again on where the pipes run out to. Sometimes not even possible. So you'll have to switch to bottled water. Don't even know what you're going to be doing with that. So something to look into. Another thing is it rebuildable? So a property not being rebuildable is not necessarily a disaster. You are covered by insurance in case of an earthquake, up to half the cost of a new build. In all other cases, up to the complete cost of a rebuild. A typical cookie cutter kind of family home in Japan probably costs about 15 million yen to build from scratch. Demolishing and removing the older structure might be 5 or 6 million yen, but you will have to build it on a different land plot, which means that if the property does come crashing down for one reason or another, you will get your insurance compensation, but you'll have to purchase another land plot to build the property on with that compensation money that you'll be receiving. Again, something to be aware of. Future buyers as well, not all of them will buy a property for you. Banks will not lend for a non-rebuildable property. So if you are selling it down the track, you'll be limited to cash buyers only. Again, just something to be aware of before you get into it. And lastly, what are you planning to do with the property, right? If you're planning to use it for your own holiday home, fantastic, not a problem. If you're planning to rent it out long-term, is there a tenant base in the area? Will anybody be renting it from you? If it's one of those charming, dying out, emptying little machiyas in the michis in the countryside, then maybe the population is not going to be there to rent out in the future. If it's something that you're planning to use as a holiday home and then rent out Airbnb or monthly throughout the rest of the year, if it's short-term stays, we've discussed extensively yesterday, licensing and zoning are quite strict in Japan in many locations. You might not be able to. Even for monthly rentals, which are officially normal rentals by law, you don't need any special permission to do that. But Is there anyone in the area to manage it for you? The further away you are from a major city, the less likely you are to be able to find a property manager. Long-term property managers probably available in most areas in Japan. Monthly, short-term stay, hardly. So the further you are from a major metropolitan center, the less likely, unless you're going to be living in the property yourself, the less likely you are going to be able to have somebody manage and rent it out for you. Management services, generally speaking, maintenance services, either through a company like ours or directly in front of local contractors, would be available. But to run a property on a short-term or monthly rental basis, you need to have cleaners who are available in the area. So even the companies, there are not many of them, but there are a few companies in the country. Smart Inn is one that we work with that do provide national coverage for short-term stay operations, but they are reliant on local cleaners. If they can find local cleaners in those areas to come in between guests, handle check-ins and check-outs can be handled remotely with electronic locks, but if they can't get somebody there to clean the property physically between guests, then they're not going to be able to manage it for you. So that's something to look into as well. If you're planning to start a business, if the goal of buying an Akiya is to start a different kind of business, a shop or a restaurant, again, do you have the clientele in that area? Do your market research? Is it possible for you to even be operating a business? I mean, you can operate the business if the zoning allows it, but will anybody be coming in? If not, if the area is super rural and you do want to, start a hospitality or other type of business there, you will need to market the entire area on your channels. The short-term stay property managers can list the property for you and take your bookings, but if nobody wants to go there, you'll have a very serious marketing campaign on your hand to even bring the area to people's attention before you can talk about the house that you're renting out. Matt, who's speaking later today, is the absolute wizard of rural rejuvenation. He'll explain exactly how those kinds of things are done, but that's, again, something to be aware of. Okay, let's say you're buying a building. Okay, so most of our clients will be buying a smaller building because a lot of them are cash buyers or are just not eligible for the extent of the loan that they want in Japan. Alicia, I think, is here today as well. She can definitely help you with that. But otherwise, speak of the devil. But otherwise, most people who buy in cash will be buying smaller buildings. So let's say 2-3 floors, somewhere between 4 to 12 units ish, and mostly wooden structure or steel framed wooden structure, and very viable investment. You got a lot more flexibility with it as opposed to owner union situation where you have to only do what the owner union allows you to. Short-term stays are almost never an option. Monthly are tricky. Commercial rentals, maybe if the owner union specifically allows it in the rule book. But when you own the entire building, aside from the fact that you've got a larger land plot, which is something that tends to gain value more than something that's pure structure with a smidgen of land, like a condo unit, you will have the flexibility to do a lot more with it. And potentially, if it's central enough, you will have better capital growth potential if and when Japan experiences capital growth, which is anyone's guess. The last 15 years have been good, but that's on the back of 25 years of deflation, so who knows? Shrinking population, debt to GDP ratio, there are a lot of macro factors here that may mean this trend will not continue forever. We don't know. Not to mention wars, Ukraine, China, Taiwan. Anything could happen. So if we're banking on cash flow, here's what we need to be thinking about. How old is the structure? Wooden structures, as a rule, as we've mentioned, built pretty flimsy, non-durable materials in Japan, unless they were built in the last 10, 15 years where things kind of started improving a little bit. Buildings are built sturdier than family homes, so they're not as flimsy as an Akiya, but still, once they get past 20 and definitely once they get past 30 years of age, maintenance, renovation expenses will become a more frequent and more expensive thing. So if you're buying anything that's over 20 years on purchase, I'd give yourself maybe 7-8 years before you'll need to consider reselling it to avoid your yield shrinking as a result of higher maintenance expenses. And investors buying the property from you are very well aware of that, so they will be offering less for it because they're thinking about the same thing. How much is it going to cost me to maintain in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? So as they reach 30 years of age, if it's a wooden structure, I personally would consider reselling it, unless, again, you're planning to ride it till it drops kind of thing, but something to take into account. What are the actual annual costs? The listings on the Japanese property websites normally, unless the agent is pretty diligent, normally don't tell you what the annual running costs are. So when you own the entire structure, there's no reserve fund, there's no owner union, everything is on you. You need to set money aside for whatever maintenance, renovation, and annual costs the building takes, and you need to pay those annual costs. So if it's a nicer, younger building and you're catering to young professionals, a lot of the time there'll be a shared internet connection that you'll be providing to all the units. That costs, I don't know, $100 a month. How much is property tax? Depending on how the building is laid out, does it have, a little bit of bushes and trees around it? Needs to be pressure cleaned once a year. Fire safety equipment needs to be checked and occasionally repaired. You need to be aware of what the annual costs are. The yield that you see on the listing, I would take at least 2% off that without even seeing the actual numbers. So if something says on the Japanese listings 6% net yield, probably more like 4.5. Find out what these costs are. Make sure they're in your Excel sheets. If it's going to be a cash flow property. Who are your tenants? A lot of our customers, most of our customers, I would say, prefer to buy what's called in Japan owner change properties, meaning there's already tenants in the units or in most of the units in case of a building. How many of the units are actually occupied? If you've got a 12-unit building and only 4 of the units are occupied, there is a reason for that. It could be that the seller was just not worried about, trying to get new tenants as they moved out. Maybe they wanted to sell it vacant for whatever reason, but that's rare. Usually, if the building is not at least 80% occupied, there is something that you want to be looking into. Maybe the distance to the station is challenging. Maybe it hasn't been maintained properly. Maybe the property management company handling the building is not doing a very good job, which is all fixable, except distance to station. That's not fixable, but everything else is fixable. But you need to, again, be aware of it. And also, who are your tenants, right? So even if you're buying a brand new property, in many cases, the developers will give you a guarantee on the rent and work to, the developer sellers will work to populate the property for you. So they'll give it to you with completely full units. But if they're selling it, they might not be too concerned about who the tenant is, right? Maybe the guarantee company check was not done. Maybe it's not such a good guarantee company, not such a good tenant, not outright illegal in most cases, but sometimes they just want to sell it fully tenanted, which looks good on paper, but you want to confirm who the tenants are, when do they move in, how much are they paying, how old are they, what was their employment status when they checked into the apartments for the first time, and what kind of guarantees they have. So we got 3 kinds of guarantees in Japan. The least attractive one is a personal guarantor, because that can be an elderly parent who passes away. It could be a friend who's just not going to return calls, change their address and phone number, nobody can find them again. Personal guarantors are generally the least attractive of the guarantee options. The next is a security deposit, which would be 1 or 2 months, maybe 3 months if they have pets, which is your choice if you're owning the entire building. And the best form of guarantee is a guarantee company, right? A guarantee company will cover normally, depending on the contract, but will cover normally up to 3 months of missing or delayed rents, as well as forced eviction expenses. So if the tenant hasn't paid or they disappeared, which happens a lot with Southeast Asian students, for example, the guarantee company will cover you for the rental income until they get a court order to unilaterally take ownership of the unit again. So there are no forced evictions are very rare in Japan. You don't have to take anyone to court to kick them out if they're not paying the rent, but you do need to get the permission to take ownership of the unit again once they have disappeared or moved out, if it was a unilateral cancellation of the contract. So a guarantee company will cover you for that, and in many cases also for some of the renovation and cleaning expenses. So at a minimum 3 months of rent, which is better than the 1 or 2 months security deposit. Again, distance to station. We spoke about this at the panel yesterday. As Shu mentioned, in some cases, if the bus service is very convenient, distance to a bus station would be enough. But in most cases, you want to be within 10 up to 15-minute walk if it's a major station at most. And that should be train, subway, or tram, depending on what the facilities in that particular city are. If it's family-sized units that come with a parking spot or a nearby available relatively cheap parking spot, that's fine as well. Singles and young couples normally would not have a car. So for their sakes, you want to keep it within reasonable commuting distance. In other cases, you want to make sure that there's parking. Again, if it's family-sized units, take that into account. That will usually reflect in vacancies as well. So if you're seeing a vacant unit, again, that could be because of lack of parking in the case of family-sized units, or lack of or distance to station in case of singles, young couples units. So condo investor, people who buy individual unit. We're not talking budgets at all. I'm not mentioning any numbers because every location in Japan would be different in that regard. Tokyo is obviously insane. Other places as well. Other places you can find some very good investment properties in out of central Tokyo and Osaka. There are, the 7 big cities in Japan, prefectural capitals, satellite cities. There are a lot of good locations to invest in Japan, and the prices will vary accordingly. So we're not talking numbers. We're just talking about bargains, right? You're seeing a really good deal, really good yield on paper, or maybe you run your Excel sheets and it actually looks like good yield. Those are the things to check into, regardless of how much the property costs and how much you're saving. So if you're buying a condo unit, meaning there's an owner union in place and the building is being managed either by a building management company or directly by the owner union, self-managed building, which happens a lot with the smaller buildings. So concrete block of up to, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 floors, maybe total of 20, 30 units, could potentially not even have a building management company. That can be okay if most of the owners are owners occupied. Those usually take good care of the building, even if they're self-managing it. If it's mostly an investment building, meaning the units are studios or 1 bedrooms, and most of the people who will be buying those units are never going to live in them, and vice versa. The tenants are not going to be able to afford to buy the unit because they're fairly low-income tenants if they're living in a small unit like that. You want a building management company in place, but regardless of who's managing the building, if it's a owner union or a owner union directly or a building management company, you want to look into the building's renovation history, management essentially. You want to look into the building's renovation history. What have they done in the last 10 years? You want to look into how much they've got in reserve funds. So if they haven't done any big renovations, maybe they weren't required yet, but do they have enough money to pay for the next big renovation? And do they have a renovation plan for the future? You basically want to see that the building is well managed. If it's not, the likelihood of building fees increasing very quickly and very frequently because they'll be running out of money, or alternatively, in a worst case scenario, the owner union hitting up each of the owners for a one-time lump payment for some work that needs to be done, you might suddenly be asked to pay $5,000-6,000 because something needs to be done and they just don't have enough money for it. So again, all of that eats into your yield significantly and could potentially cause you to try and resell the property because it's suddenly not yielding enough. And then investors, again, are buying it from you. They'll take all of that into consideration. The price will drop when you resell it as well. What is the real yield? The Japanese property listings show 2 numbers. Coupon yield, which is gross, which is completely meaningless because it takes nothing into account, not even the monthly building fees. And also, they show a number that's net yield, but that net yield number doesn't include the purchase cost, doesn't include your property management costs. Again, use your Excel sheet, make sure what the actual yield is. If it's up to 5 floors, the 5th, 4th, 3rd floor are going to be difficult to access for elderly folks, single moms with lots of shopping bags and a toddler on their shoulders, and buildings up to 5 floors may or may not have an elevator. Make sure that you're aware of that. Otherwise, if you're buying a unit in the 5th or 4th floor, sometimes on the 3rd floor of a building without an elevator, you will experience much longer vacancies because less of your tenant base will be interested in it. And again, who's the tenant? How long are they in there? Were they employed at the time when they signed up for the contract? Have they been paying on time? How old are they? All of the things that we've mentioned with a small building. Lastly, if you're buying land to build something of your own on, it could be a holiday home, it could be a commercial structure, logistics warehouse facilities. We've got a lot of customers doing that. It could be a small building of your own that you want to build brand new and then rent it out. Whatever the case may be, what is the lay of the land? So the fact that you found a cheap plot of land does not mean that you'll be able to do with it whatever you're planning to do with it. So the things you want to look at is obviously if it's rebuildable or not. That should be noted on the listings, but do confirm that with the listing agent, because some of them just, especially with land, they just plop it in there with a layout and a price and not much else. So confirm that what you're planning to build there is buildable there. It's probably not going to be completely not buildable if the listing doesn't mention it, but maybe you're planning to build a 3-story, 12-unit, again, small rental building, and maybe the zoning regulations don't actually allow for anything bigger than a teeny tiny family home. So look into what you can actually build there and whether that suits your financial projections and your plan. What are the infrastructures? Again, if it's very rural, where are the sewage lines? Where are the water lines? Are you able to easily connect to them? Is gas being provided via city gas or via a commercial company propane tanks, which is fine, but again, costs money, more money than city gas, so factor it into your considerations. And how accessible is the property, right? If the terrain is severely sloped, if there are trees on there that need to be cleared off before you can build it, all of this will cost you more when you construct. So whatever construction plan you have in your Excel sheets, make sure to actually get estimates that are relevant to the terrain, whether the layout of the land, how accessible it is, and what's on it at the time of breaking ground. Zoning regulations. If you're planning to run a business in this location, we have a lot of customers who are into car export, import, working on vintage cars, whatever the case may be. They all want to set up a house with a workshop. Zoning might allow you to do that physically, but does the area fall under an urban control zone, which means that you cannot be running any sort of garage or operations, depending on what the case may be. Maybe a logistical facility would be okay, but any kind of workshop would not be okay. Make sure that the zoning allows you to run whatever business you're planning to be running there. And accessibility also means the roads leading to the property, right? So if the road is extremely steep or extremely narrow, any kind of construction vehicles will not be able to go up it. They'll have to park down the hill, which can sometimes be several blocks away, and they'll have a bunch of 8, 10, 12 people carrying everything to the house for, I don't know, up to half a kilometer, whatever the case may be. That's going to blow up your construction costs. Blanca can probably expand on that, but the less accessible the property is to work vehicles, the more you're going to pay for any building or any renovation on it. And if you're running a hospitality property, then your guests need to get there, right? Is public transportation available all the way to your door? Are you planning to be going and picking them up from the station? If they are driving on their own, depending on what kind of business you're running, are they able to drive up to the property, or do they again have to park somewhere in the distance? And then how long do they need to walk from that parking to the hospitality property? How much does it cost them in parking every day? Depending again on what your business plan is, you want to make sure that the plot that you're building will allow you to do that. I think I'm over time. So, any questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Can you comment on? Sorry. Can you comment on some of the things you do to vet, say, potential buildings or even listing agents, where perhaps they there are some real estate companies who deal with like single occupancy mansions, like one room mansions, that are maybe a little bit more, say, unscrupulous with bait and switch master leases, things like that. That they'll fill the property and guarantee rent, but once it sits vacant, they reduce the rent and you can't get out the lease, things like that.
So you're referring to property managers?
Companies who also double as property managers, like they vertically integrate. And
well, regardless of whether they're realtors and property managers or just property managers, what we would be looking at in this case is, first of all, researching what the average rent in the area is for a comparable unit, right? So if I'm seeing, if this unit is renting out for, I don't know, Rokuman, like 60,000 yen a month, and I'm doing a little bit of research and I'm seeing that all of the comparable properties, so similar size, similar floor in the building, if it's with an elevator or without, similar distance to the station, similar age, if they're all being listed at the moment for 50,000 yen, that means that they'll probably rent out for 45, 47,000 yen. Clearly, that tenant is paying more than the average market rent, which is not a problem. I mean, rents go not much up in Japan, but they do go down over time, slightly creeping upwards in the last few years, but normally they would go down over time. That tenant might have been there for 10, 15 years, which is not uncommon in Japan. And they may have been paying the rent that they've been paying when they moved in. The rent is now much lower, but they don't want to deal with the conflict of asking for a rent reduction, and they definitely don't want to move out because they like things to stay the same. So they're still paying the same rent. Not a problem, but I'll put it into my Excel sheet to see how much I'm actually making. As for the quality of the tenant, we look at the lease, right? So when we submit an offer, the offer is pending due diligence, meaning we want to see the building's renovation history, again, reserve funds, tenant lease, non-payment issues. We're not necessarily going to know what the interior condition is if they live there for a long time, because nobody can enter a tenanted property in Japan. But if they've lived there for a long time, we can kind of, based on the size of the property, assume what it'll take to renovate and repair it when they move out. Changes with male, female, hikikomori, not hikikomori, but we can kind of assume. But in many cases, not many, I shouldn't say in many cases, in very few cases, we have noticed that the lease didn't actually reflect the practice, right? So when we buy an owner-change property, we either inherit the property manager or we can immediately replace them with our property manager. Our property managers will be looking at the lease and trying to confirm if that looks. They have their own ways of figuring out if something is fake or not and who the actual person living there is. They'll contact the guarantee company. They'll contact the tenant, try to contact the tenant to inform them the property management is about to change and here's the new account details to deposit your rent into. And they will suss out whether that actual tenant is there. Sometimes it'll be something kind of innocent, like again, Southeast Asian students often just, somebody else ends up living there, or there's 3 people living there and the original 2 are nowhere to be seen. They went back to wherever. Maybe not a big issue, but they will refuse to take on a property if everything is not exactly as per the lease. We have had one case where they actually figured out, don't ask me how, they actually figured out that this is a Yakuza thing, right? Like it's somebody renting the property out for a different purpose. The name, the phone number, the previous address, something was not right. The thing is, when you contact a listing licensed Japanese agent and inform them, even post-settlement, you inform them that they have misrepresented the property for whatever reason, and they will be very panicky about potentially losing their license. So in that particular case, they have refunded us the total cost of the property. They have paid for the ownership change back to them, and they added some compensation, all to avoid being reported to the Legal Affairs Bureau and potentially losing their license. So Japan is a very legal recourse kind of well-documented country. You don't run a huge risk unless you're dealing with multi-billion-dollar developments where the Yakuza will be shaking you down, but that doesn't happen to simple folks like us. Normally, if you take up any issue with the listing agent who sold you the property, that will be reversible.
We have one question from the chat. I'm going to be focusing on military housing as I am a 100% disabled vet. And do you have any experience working with on-base housing?
We have a lot of experience with people wanting to do military housing. They've contacted us repeatedly and have been then contacting the housing office. We've helped them with purchases, which I'm not sure how they handled rentals down the track. We now have one live client that we're actually assisting with all of that. So I'll be able to provide more feedback. But what I can say is that from our contact with housing offices in various bases around the country, they are quite different. So now we're doing Sasebo. Previously, we were talking to people in Yokosuka. Yokosuka had everything nailed down. They knew exactly what size, to approve the rent allowance for their military personnel. They need to make sure that the property complies with a bunch of stuff. They had a list of property managers that we can work with who are able to provide services in English to both the tenants and the landlords. And it was a very limited list. Now we're doing the same thing in Sasebo. It's a lot harder to get any kind of information. They say, kind of like this, kind of like that. Any property manager will be okay. Just call us in and we'll have a look and we'll let you know if it's okay or not. So all I can say is that every base is different, unfortunately. Any more questions? Going once.
One more from the chat.
Okay.
For urban real estate agents, what sort of overall area do they work in and monitor listings for?
Urban real estate agents. So differentiate there. There's the listing agent who will normally be covering their city, maybe a few smaller cities around it. If it's a smaller township, then sometimes it'll be a local agent, sometimes it'll be a listing agent from the nearest big metropolitan centers. If it's a buyer side agent, and especially if it's a foreigner friendly, internationally minded buyer side agent who can handle English conversations, English documentation, can offer remote viewing services, the types that more traditional realtors normally don't do, then often, or at least the ones that we work with, will be okay covering anywhere in the country. You obviously have to pay them when they go and view a property on your behalf. So if we're in Hokkaido, we get people to work with, Tokyo, Osaka, Fukuoka, anywhere in between those locations, we will have to send someone from the nearest big metropolitan centers. We have some people that we can utilize, even if the agent is based in Tokyo. Takumi-san, for example, where is he? Takumi-san, raise your hand for me. There he is, in the back there. Takumi-san runs a renovation company in Osaka, Kyoto. I think he covers Nara and Kobe areas as well. They do very good renovations, and they're also very helpful for us whenever we need to view a property. They graciously agree to go and view it for us, regardless of which agent we're working with. So we utilize whoever we can utilize, and the buyer side agents that we vet and are happy to work with will normally cover the entire country. But there will be some costs involved in getting them out to view a property, or to sometimes the seller will insist on a face-to-face signing of the contract. So again, they'll have to go there in person. It will be a few extra $100 up to $1,000, depending on where the property is per visit.
Okay, I think we're low on time. So last question.
From the room, please. Yeah, we can do the chat further on the QA panel.
Thank you. So just one question regarding the Akiyas, and you mentioned that there should also always be a sort of a structural inspection. So my question is just a couple of questions. So the first question is, when they do these structural inspections, how intrusive is it? Do they have to actually, do they just walk around, climb under the building? Do they have to go into the walls? Again, with respect to that, because with the new regulations from April 1st, obviously a lot of these Akiya don't have their building certifications, or, so I'm just kind of curious of how intrusive those sort of inspections are. In terms of whether they have to open up walls and things like that, and then generally, what is the running cost or the cost of that sort of service?
So structural inspection cannot be intrusive because you don't own the property at this stage, right? So obviously the seller is not going to be breaking up the floor and the walls for you, because you might buy the property down the track. So they'll do the best that they can. The companies that we work with, at least, and most of the companies that are licensed for architectural structural inspections, provide a very detailed report. But there's a limit to what they can do. If the property doesn't have access to the foundation space or access to the attic space, then they'll give you their best opinion based on what they can see. And they're not going to climb the roof. That requires scaffolding, and again, a lot of time and a lot of expense. But there are some companies that provide drone surface scans of the roof these days. It's the next best thing to somebody actually knocking on tiles physically up there. The cost for a typical size family home up to, let's say, 130 square meters is usually going to be about 150,000 yen, maybe a little bit lower. If it's beyond that, it's getting closer to about 250, 300,000 yen normally. Thank you. Two things. Number one, in the breakout room, we were originally going to talk portfolio structuring. That's going to happen now. But I think I've decided to just make it anything you want. So we can do the portfolio structuring. We can look at online listings together. We can do more Q&A. Up to you. One thing I forgot to mention, when you're preparing a business plan, so if this is going to be a rental property, and definitely if it's going to be a business, and the more you make, the more you want to be aware of your tax liabilities as well. So I completely forgot to mention that. So be aware of depending on your residency status in Japan, depending on how much income you're making from other sources in Japan, depending on what tax threshold you are, just make sure that you do the proper financial planning, and you also factor in accounting costs, right? They're different for individuals, they're different for corporates. That all needs to be a part of your plan. Setting up a company, paying the annual upkeep for a company, and accounting and bookkeeping, that all costs money. So whatever the business plan is, I check it with an accountant first. Our sponsors, Kaku Accounting, our personal accountants, and many of our clients, unfortunately couldn't be with us here today, but they're amazing, affordable, and fully bilingual. Daigo Sato-san, who is speaking at our conference next year, is also a fantastic accountant. I think Tracy over there can vouch to his services. Get a proper bilingual accountant familiar with cross-border taxation treaties and information on your side. It's vital for any kind of business plan, even for the most basic rentals. Thank you.